Sandra woke up to silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, the kind that feels heavy. She turned on her phone, minus 600 unread messages. Her inbox was full of angry emails. Her social media accounts were flooded with hate. Her work had sent her a short message. Sandra, due to public backlash and internal review, you are placed on leave effective immediately. She dropped the phone. Her breathing became shallow. No, this can't be happening. But it was. The world wasn't just watching her anymore. The world had turned on her. Online, people were digging into her past. Old posts, old videos, comments she had made years ago. Screenshots were everywhere. Every detail of her life was now public. Racist Karen strikes again. One headline read. Another post had a side-by-side image. On the left, Sandra, yelling in the park. On the right, Governor Taylor, calm and powerful beside her son. The caption, 2 women, 2 worlds, 1 truth. People were calling for action. Some said Sandra should be arrested. Others said she needed to apologize, publicly. But Sandra wasn't ready for any of that. She was too scared to go outside, too ashamed to even look at herself in the mirror. She thought it was just a small moment in a park. She had no idea that one moment would change everything. Back at the governor's home, Jamal was watching cartoons. But Governor Taylor sat in her office, serious and focused. Her assistant entered, holding a folder. "Ma'am, the Education Board wants you to speak at the school conference next week." "About what?" "They want you to talk about what happened. About race. About justice." Governor Taylor closed her eyes for a moment. And Sandra? Still trending. Her workplace released a new statement. She's officially fired. There was silence. Then Governor Taylor stood up. "It's not just about her anymore. It's about what she represents." "What do you mean?" "She didn't just call the police on a child," the governor said. "She acted on fear, on bias, on old beliefs that need to die." The assistant nodded slowly. "So what now?" "We teach," the governor said. "We show the world what real justice looks like." Meanwhile, Sandra's neighbors stopped talking to her. People crossed the street when she walked outside. Her mail was filled with hate letters. Her parents called, crying. "Why didn't you just mind your business?" her father asked. Sandra had no answer. She stayed up late every night, watching the videos over and over. She watched herself pointing, yelling, accusing a child. And she watched the boys mutter, so calm, so controlled. She saw the moment the police realized they were wrong. And she saw her own face, full of fear, anger, and regret. One morning, Sandra walked to the park. It was quiet, just a few kids playing. No cameras, no phones. She sat on a bench and stared at the swing. That's where it all started. She whispered to herself, "I just thought something was wrong." But no one was around to listen. She was alone. Back at the governor's mansion, Jamal was drawing again. This time, he drew himself smiling at the park. No yelling woman, no police, just him, swinging. Governor Taylor looked at the drawing. "You want to go back?" Jamal nodded. "This time, I won't be scared." She smiled. "You were never scared, Jamal. You were brave. The world just didn't see it yet." That night, Governor Taylor sat in front of a camera. A quiet room. No reporters. Just her and a message. She pressed record. "Hi," she said. "You all know what happened. You saw the video. You saw my son." She paused. "But what you didn't see is what comes next." The airplane soared high above the clouds. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats. The flight attendants walked up and down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks to the travelers. It was an ordinary flight. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just another journey from one city to another. Among the passengers was a woman named Maya, sitting in the first-class section. She was quiet, composed and dressed in simple yet elegant clothing. She had a book in her hand, her eyes focused on the pages. To anyone looking, she seemed like just another passenger, blending in with the rest. But what no one knew was that Maya wasn't just another passenger. She wasn't a regular person flying on a private jet or even a first-class traveler. She was the owner of the plane. And yet, she was about to experience something no one expected. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, making their rounds, when one of them, Sandra, approached Maya. Sandra was a middle-aged woman with short, dark hair and a sharp look in her eyes. She had worked as a flight attendant for years and had seen all kinds of passengers. But Maya, sitting there quietly, seemed to stand out. Sandra noticed the bag on the seat next to Maya. It was a small leather handbag, carefully placed beside her, taking up a little more space than it should. Sandra's patience, worn thin from the long flight, finally snapped. She approached Maya's seat and stood there, waiting for her to notice. When Maya didn't acknowledge her, Sandra repeated the request, a little more forcefully this time. "Excuse me, miss. Could you move your bag, please?" Maya glanced up from her book and gave Sandra a polite smile. "Oh, sorry. I didn't hear you," she said calmly. Sandra's patience was starting to fray. She hadn't expected to be ignored, and she didn't like it. "I asked you to move your bag. Please move it now." Her tone was sharper this time, her words more clipped. Maya, still smiling gently, nodded. "I'll move it in a minute. I'm just finishing this page." Sandra's face tightened. She wasn't used to being treated this way. Passengers didn't ignore her, especially not in first class. She took a deep breath and leaned forward, reaching for the bag. But instead of being careful, she roughly grabbed it, pulling it away from the seat. Maya's smile faded. She looked up at Sandra, now slightly irritated. But before she could say anything, Sandra snapped, "Move it next time when I ask." Maya stood up, still calm, but now her voice carried a firmness. "I said I'd move it. No need for that tone." Sandra's face flushed with anger. Who did this woman think she was? She was just another passenger after all. But something about the calm way Maya spoke irritated Sandra even more. Without thinking, Sandra did something she would regret. She slapped Maya. It wasn't a hard slap, but it was enough to shock everyone around. The sound echoed in the silence of the cabin, and everyone froze. For a moment, no one knew what had just happened. Passengers in the nearby seats stared wide-eyed at the scene unfolding before them. The flight attendants looked at each other, unsure of how to react. Maya didn't move. She didn't shout or scream. She didn't even seem angry. Instead, she simply wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. The slap had stung, but she wasn't going to let it show. Sandra stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. What had she just done? She had slapped a passenger in first class. She had completely lost control. But more than that, she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Maya slowly stood up from her seat, her eyes meeting Sandra's with a calm, almost unsettling gaze. The flight attendant's hands trembled as she stepped back, unsure of what was happening or what she should do next. The passengers around them were still silent. All eyes were on the two women. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell or scream. She simply stood there, waiting for Sandra to say something, waiting for an apology. But instead of an apology, Sandra found herself growing more defensive. She crossed her arms and said sharply, "What? You got a problem with me?" Maya blinked, not believing what she was hearing. This wasn't an argument she was interested in. The situation had already escalated enough. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Sandra's face. "I think it's time to call the manager," Maya said quietly, her voice steady but filled with an underlying warning. Sandra's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know who Maya was, but something about her felt different. The calmness, the way she spoke, and the way the entire cabin seemed to freeze around them. It was all too much for Sandra to handle. She had made a mistake, and deep down she knew it. A mistake she might never be able to fix. Sandra took a hesitant step back, and the moment she turned to go, Maya made a quiet request. "Before you go, please remember, I'm not just any passenger." The words hung in the air, thick with tension. What did she mean by that? The other passengers looked at each other, whispering amongst themselves. No one knew who Maya really was. But in that moment, they were all about to find out. The silence in the cabin was deafening. The slap had been a shock, but now there was something even more unsettling in the air. Passengers glanced nervously at each other, unsure of what was happening. Sandra stood near the front, her hands trembling, while Maya remained calm, her eyes steady, but with an unreadable expression. Maya didn't seem angry. She didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood there, her posture straight, waiting. But there was something in the air now, a tension that hadn't been there before. It felt as though the entire flight had just shifted, and the quiet, calm woman who had been sitting in the first-class seat was no longer just an ordinary passenger. Sandra, still shaken from what had just happened, hesitated. She had been a flight attendant for over 15 years, but nothing had ever prepared her for a situation like this. She thought the slap would be the end of it, but it was just the beginning. As Sandra turned to walk away, she overheard one of the passengers whisper, "Did you see that? Who does she think she is?" Sandra's heart skipped a beat. The comment wasn't loud enough for anyone else to hear, but she caught it. And that's when the first seed of doubt was planted in her mind. Who was this woman, really? Why was everyone acting so strangely? Sandra walked briskly to the front of the cabin, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had done something terrible, something that would come back to haunt her. She needed to apologize, but she didn't know how. She wasn't even sure how to face Maya after what had happened. Meanwhile, Maya sat back down in her seat, her mind still calm, but her thoughts racing. She had let the situation play out without losing her cool, but there was a reason she hadn't gotten upset. She knew who she was. To anyone else on the plane, she was just a quiet woman traveling alone. But Maya wasn't just anyone. She owned the plane. Her eyes drifted to the window, watching as the clouds parted beneath the airplane. The view was breathtaking, but it did little to distract her from what was unfolding inside the cabin. She had handled this calmly, but something inside her was telling her that this wasn't over. There was more to come. The flight attendants, who had been avoiding eye contact with her, now seemed to glance in her direction whenever they passed. They didn't know what to do. Some of them were afraid to approach her, while others were too nervous to even look at her directly. Sandra walked up to the cockpit, her hands still shaking, her mind a whirlwind. She paused for a moment at the door. Should she apologize now? Or should she wait? What if Maya had reported her? What if things got worse? With a deep breath, Sandra knocked lightly, and then entered. "Captain," Sandra said, her voice still tight. "I need to talk to you about something that just happened." The captain, a tall man in his late 40s, turned his head toward her. He had seen a lot of things in his career, but he could tell by the look on Sandra's face that this was serious. What happened? Sandra hesitated before answering. She didn't want to sound crazy, but she had to say something. "There's a passenger in first class. I slapped her." Her voice lowered with embarrassment. "I don't know why I did it." She was calm at first, but when I asked her to move her bag, she didn't. I lost my temper. But then, I don't know, something felt off about her. The captain stared at her for a moment, processing what she was saying. "You slapped a passenger?" he repeated, his eyebrows furrowing. Sandra nodded, feeling worse with every second. "Who is she?" the captain asked. "I don't know, but something's strange. I've never seen her before. She just doesn't seem like a normal passenger." Sandra felt like she was digging herself deeper into a hole, but the captain didn't interrupt her. He stood up from his seat and looked toward the cabin. Something was happening on this flight that was not normal, and the captain could feel it in the air. Back in first class, Maya remained seated, her book in hand again, but her mind was far from the words on the page. She had noticed the flight attendants whispering and glancing at her. She knew they were nervous, but she didn't care. They didn't know who she was, and that was fine. What mattered now was how the situation would unfold. She had no intention of making a scene, but if anyone thought they could push her around, they were about to learn a harsh lesson. Maya was not just any passenger. She was the owner of this plane, and that meant things worked differently for her. She closed her book, leaned back in her seat, and pressed the call button. It was time to get the attention of the right people. Maya was ready to take control of the situation. The flight attendant walked quickly back to the front of the plane, his footsteps echoing through the quiet cabin. As he passed the cockpit, he glanced at the captain, who gave him a small nod. The captain knew this was serious. Something bigger was unfolding, and he was starting to feel the weight of the situation. Meanwhile, Maya sat in her seat, her calm demeanor never faltering. She had handled worse in her life. Much worse. But this was different. It was all about the principle of respect. No one had the right to treat her like that, especially not in her own domain. She had been a silent observer, watching the scene unfold with quiet patience, but now she was ready to make her move. The flight attendants were nervous, and rightfully so. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Sandra, still standing by the cockpit, wrung her hands together nervously. She had no idea what was about to happen. She only knew that everything was spiraling out of control. She had never slapped a passenger before. It felt like an unbelievable mistake, but now she had to face the consequences. She couldn't help but replay the moment over and over in her mind. Why had she reacted like that? She wasn't usually like this. She had a kind heart, a gentle nature. But something about Maya had triggered her. She couldn't explain it. All she knew was that she had been embarrassed, humiliated, and now she feared what would come next. A few minutes later, the senior flight attendant returned to first class, his eyes focused on Maya. This time, he didn't make the mistake of underestimating her calm composure. There was an undeniable presence about her that was almost impossible to ignore. He stood for a moment at the entrance of the first-class cabin, unsure of how to approach her. Maya looked up at him, her eyes sharp and expectant. "Is the manager coming?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. "Yes, ma'am," the flight attendant replied, almost automatically. "He'll be here shortly." Maya nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "Good. I have some things I need to address." The flight attendant hesitated, but then nodded and left her to her thoughts. Back at the front of the cabin, Captain Richards was deep in conversation with the senior staff. He knew things were about to take a turn, but he wasn't prepared for just how big this moment was. He had no idea who Maya was, but something told him that this wasn't just about a simple slap. It was about something much deeper. "Do you have any idea who that woman is?" the captain asked one of the flight attendants. "No, sir," the attendant replied, shaking his head. "She seemed normal enough when she boarded, but something's off. I've never seen a passenger handle a situation like that so calmly after being slapped. I thought maybe she would cause a scene, but she didn't." The captain frowned, his mind working quickly. He had a sinking feeling in his gut. What if they had underestimated this woman? The flight manager stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to digest the revelation that Maya was, in fact, the owner of the airline. His mind was spinning with a mix of disbelief and panic. He had no idea how to handle this situation. He had been trained to deal with unruly passengers, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Maya, however, seemed completely unfazed. Her calmness only added to the tension. It was clear she wasn't interested in creating a scene, but she wasn't going to let this matter go either. She had been disrespected, and no amount of apologies could change that. The only thing that could restore the balance now was action. With a quiet nod, the flight manager turned and hurriedly made his way to the front of the plane. Maya's eyes followed him, her mind already processing the next steps. She had nothing to prove to anyone, but she wasn't about to let a flight attendant's careless mistake go unchecked. This was about principles, not just personal pride. As the flight manager disappeared into the cabin, Maya reclined in her seat, crossing her arms. Her thoughts drifted back to the slap, the action that had set everything in motion. She had been caught off guard at first, but now, in retrospect, it almost felt like fate. Fate had a way of bringing out the truth. Maya had seen how people treated others when they thought no one was watching. She had built her empire, not just with brains and strategy, but with a deep understanding of human nature. The way people underestimated others, especially people of color, especially women, was something she knew all too well. But she wasn't just anybody. She had fought tooth and nail to get to this point, and she wasn't going to let anyone treat her like she didn't belong. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. The flight manager was back, but this time, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Sandra, the flight attendant. She looked anxious, her face pale and full of regret. She had already realized her mistake, but now it was time to face the consequences. She stood silently as the manager gestured toward Maya. "Ma'am," the flight manager said, his voice much more composed than before, "this is Sandra. She'd like to apologize for her actions. She realizes now that her behavior was unacceptable." Maya looked at Sandra, her eyes narrowing slightly. Sandra was nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. She opened her mouth to speak, but then closed it again. The words didn't seem to come easily. "I'm sorry," Sandra finally said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know who you were. I was just upset, and I acted out of line." Maya studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. It wasn't just the slap that bothered her. It was the arrogance of someone assuming they had the right to treat others that way. Sandra had no idea who she was dealing with, and that ignorance had cost her dearly. "I understand your apology," Maya said, her voice cold but calm. "But I think you need to understand something. Respect isn't something you earn through apologies. It's something you give from the start." Sandra swallowed hard, her throat tight. She nodded, but the words didn't seem to come. She could feel the weight of Maya's gaze on her, and it made her want to sink into the floor. This wasn't just a simple apology. This was a lesson in humility, a lesson in how power and privilege were never as simple as they appeared on the surface. Maya's lips curled into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. "Let's just hope this doesn't happen again, shall we?" Sandra nodded quickly, eager to leave the tense situation behind her. She glanced at the flight manager, who gave her a nod of encouragement. Without another word, she quickly backed away and disappeared into the galley. The flight manager stayed for a moment longer, unsure of what to say. He had no idea how Maya would handle the situation next. Would she demand something drastic? Would she sue the airline? The possibilities ran through his mind as he searched for the right words. "I appreciate your professionalism, ma'am," he said, his voice slightly shaking. "If there's anything else I can do to make things right." Maya raised a hand, cutting him off. "There's nothing more to be done right now," she said. "I'm satisfied with the apology. But know this incident will be reviewed. The company needs to ensure its employees are properly trained. This should never happen again, especially not in my company." The manager nodded, relieved that Maya wasn't demanding anything extreme, but still shaken by the weight of her words. "Of course, ma'am. We'll take care of it immediately." Maya gave him a curt nod. "Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a flight to enjoy." With that, the flight manager left her side. As soon as he was gone, Maya leaned back in her seat, her fingers tracing the edge of the armrest. She had won this battle, but there was more at stake than just her dignity. The real challenge lay ahead. She would ensure that this event was a turning point for the airline, a chance to set the tone for how people were treated, no matter their appearance or status. As the flight continued on its journey, Maya remained in her seat, staring out of the window at the clouds drifting by. Despite the tense situation earlier, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She had stood her ground, and in doing so, had sent a clear message. No one, no matter their status, should be treated unfairly. It wasn't just about her. It was about setting an example for everyone around her. But even as the minutes ticked by, the incident stayed on her mind. Sandra's apology had been sincere, but Maya knew this was just the beginning. Apologies could only go so far. The real work came after. It was about the actions that followed, the changes that would be made in the airline's policies. She would ensure that this didn't happen again, and she would do it with the authority she had earned. As the plane began its descent, the flight attendants moved through the aisles, ensuring everyone was prepared for landing. Maya didn't pay much attention to them. Her mind was still racing, replaying the events of the flight in her mind. She wondered about Sandra's future with the airline. Would she learn from this mistake, or would she continue to treat others with disdain, unaware of the consequences? Maya didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a passenger on this flight. She was a force to be reckoned with. And though Sandra had made a terrible mistake, Maya's presence had shifted the dynamics on this plane. The plane touched down smoothly, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their safe arrival. But Maya was no longer focused on the destination. As the passengers began to disembark, Maya remained seated for a moment, thinking about the bigger picture. She had built her empire, not just through business deals and strategies, but through personal growth, the ability to recognize when she was being wronged, and the strength to take a stand. But more importantly, she had learned how to handle those who underestimated her. It wasn't just about being powerful, it was about being wise enough to know when to use that power. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her back to reality. A message from her assistant. "Everything is set for the meeting tomorrow, Maya. We've got the contracts ready for you to sign, and I'd also set up a press conference for your return." Maya smiled, knowing that the next chapter of her journey was already underway. Her actions on the plane today were only the beginning of a much larger shift. She wasn't just going to change the way the airline operated. She was going to change how the world saw power and privilege. As the cabin doors opened and passengers started exiting, Maya stood up and grabbed her carry-on bag. The moment she stepped out into the terminal, she was greeted by her bodyguards, who had been waiting patiently. She gave them a small nod, signaling that everything was fine. But as she walked through the terminal, something unusual happened. A man approached her, wearing a black suit with a headset in his ear. His face was serious, but there was something about the way he walked toward her that made Maya pause. "Ms. Williams?" he asked. "Yes," Maya replied, her voice calm but with a hint of curiosity. "I'm with the airport security," he said. "I have a message for you from the airline's CEO." Maya raised an eyebrow. She wasn't expecting to hear from the CEO so soon. "He would like to meet with you immediately, if that's possible," the man continued. "He wants to discuss the incident earlier today." Maya considered the offer for a moment. She wasn't sure whether the CEO was trying to smooth things over or whether he had a different agenda altogether. Regardless, she knew that this meeting would be important. The CEO was a powerful figure in the industry, and this could be her chance to make sure that changes were made on a larger scale. "I'll be there," Maya said, her voice steady and confident. She turned to her bodyguards, who were now walking beside her. "This way," the airport security guard said, leading her toward a private conference room. As they walked through the terminal, Maya couldn't help but think about the lessons she had learned over the years. People would always try to underestimate her. They would see her as just a woman, just a person of color, and assume she didn't have the power to make a difference. But she had learned how to turn that underestimation into an advantage. When people believed you had no power, that's when you had the greatest chance to surprise them. They reached the conference room, and the airport security guard knocked lightly before opening the door. The CEO was already sitting at the table, waiting for her. "Ms. Williams," he greeted her with a smile, though it seemed forced. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice." Maya nodded, not returning the smile. "I assume this is about the incident earlier today." The CEO looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Yes, indeed. We've reviewed the situation, and I wanted to personally apologize on behalf of the airline. Maya raised a hand, silencing him. I've already received an apology from your flight attendant, she said. But what I want to know is this. What are you going to do about it? The CEO's face tightened as Maya's words hung in the air. His discomfort was palpable, but Maya wasn't interested in his feelings. She was here for change. This was her moment to ensure that the airline's future would be one where passengers were treated with respect, regardless of their race or background. He cleared his throat, leaning forward slightly. Ms. Williams, I understand the gravity of the situation, and I want to assure you that we are taking immediate action. I've already initiated an internal review of the flight attendant's behavior and the overall handling of the incident. Maya sat back, her expression unreadable. An internal review. She repeated, her tone sharp. That's it. You think an internal review will solve this? The CEO's eyes flickered with a hint of unease, but he held his ground. We're also updating our training protocols to include more comprehensive sensitivity training for all staff members. Additionally, we're considering changes in how we handle complaints and escalate situations to ensure that no passenger feels marginalized or mistreated. Maya remained silent for a moment, processing his words. Sensitivity training, changes in protocols. It all sounded like the same vague promises she had heard 1,000 times before. Words weren't enough. She needed action, real change, and she needed to know that this incident wasn't going to be swept under the rug once the media attention faded. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with authority. That's a start, but it's not nearly enough. You have a responsibility, not just as a CEO, but as a leader in this industry, to ensure this doesn't happen again. Your company needs to take bold steps, real action. The CEO looked taken aback by her firmness. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially by someone like her. But Maya was unfazed. She had come too far to settle for anything less than concrete change. Maya leaned forward, her eyes locking onto the CEO's. Here's what I propose. I'll help you reshape your policies. But there's a condition. I want to be part of the process. I want to sit on the board that oversees these changes. I want to be the voice that ensures real change happens, not just lip service. The CEO blinked in surprise. For a moment, he seemed to consider her proposal. You want a seat on the board? He asked, his tone skeptical. That's not a decision I can make lightly. Maya didn't flinch. Then you'd better start thinking about it seriously. Because this issue, this kind of behavior, will continue to plague your company if you don't make a drastic change. It's not just about changing policies. It's about changing culture. Her words were powerful, cutting through the air like a blade. The CEO shifted in his seat again, his confidence waning. He was beginning to understand that Maya wasn't just some rich passenger who could be dismissed. She was someone who would fight, no matter the cost, for what was right. I'll need to speak with the board, of course, the CEO said slowly, clearly processing the magnitude of her request. But I understand your position. Let me get back to you in the next 48 hours. I promise we'll give this serious consideration. Maya nodded, her face stern. You'd better. Because if I don't hear from you by then, I'll take this issue public. For a moment, the room was silent. The tension was thick. The CEO, no longer in control of the conversation, simply nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. He understood that Maya was serious. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't asking for favors. She was demanding respect for herself, for every passenger, and for every person who had been mistreated in the airline industry. I'll be waiting, Maya said, standing up. The meeting was over, and her message had been delivered. The ball was now in the CEO's court. If he truly wanted to avoid a public relations disaster, he would have to follow through with her terms. Maya turned and walked toward the door, her steps confident and measured. She wasn't just leaving the meeting. She was walking away with the knowledge that she had just taken a step toward real change. Her bodyguards followed close behind, but for the first time that day, Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was just the beginning, but it was a beginning she had initiated on her own terms. As she stepped out into the airport's private terminal, she took a deep breath. It had been a long journey, but this was what she had worked for. This was why she had built her empire from the ground up. To make a difference. The news of the incident aboard the flight spread like wildfire. Within hours, headlines across the globe were blasting the story. Flight attendant slaps black woman. Unaware she's the billionaire owner of the plane. The initial shock turned to outrage as people learned of Maya's identity. Social media exploded with support for her, but also with intense debates about the airline's conduct, the treatment of black women, and the racial disparities that still plague the aviation industry. In the early morning hours, Maya's phone buzzed with dozens of new notifications. Calls and messages flooded in from all directions. Journalists wanted interviews, activists wanted to speak with her, and ordinary people expressed their admiration for her courage. It was clear that this moment had captured the public's attention in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her assistant's voice crackled through the phone as she answered a call. "Maya, it's time to address the public. We've got media outlets waiting for a statement. The pressure is building." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This was bigger than her. This was no longer just about getting an apology from an airline. It was about creating a shift, changing the narrative, and ensuring that no one else had to endure what she had. That afternoon, Maya stood before a camera in a sleek, modern conference room. The setting was calm, but her face reflected the seriousness of the situation. She had prepared for this moment. She had always known that her rise to success would come with challenges, but now it was time for her to use her platform for something greater. With the press at the ready, Maya took a deep breath and began. "I want to start by saying that this story is not just mine. This is the story of countless people who have faced discrimination and injustice, not just in the skies, but in every corner of society. My experience aboard that flight was painful, yes, but it is not an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a deeper issue, one that needs to be addressed now." Her words were strong, clear, and filled with a sense of purpose. The reporter sat quietly, hanging on every word. Maya could feel the weight of the moment, but she stood tall, her voice unwavering. "The fact that this happened to me, a billionaire with resources, may be shocking to some, but we need to ask ourselves why this behavior is still happening at all. Why are people still being judged by the color of their skin? Why are people still treated as less than based on their background?" The room was silent. The weight of her words hung in the air, and the world outside was listening. "I demand more than just an apology from this airline. I'm asking for a revolution in how we treat each other. We need systemic change. I will not be silenced, and I will not let my experience be dismissed as an isolated incident. This is the beginning of something much bigger." Maya paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "This isn't just about one flight or one flight attendant. This is about creating a world where respect, equality, and justice are the standards, not exceptions. We need a commitment to ensuring that every person, regardless of their background or the color of their skin, is treated with dignity." The reporter's eyes were wide. Maya's statement wasn't just powerful, it was a call to action. A challenge to the airline industry, yes, but also to every institution that allowed racism and inequality to persist. "I have already made it clear to the CEO of the airline that if meaningful change is not implemented, I will take this public, and I will do everything in my power to make sure this company is held accountable. This is about more than personal justice. It's about ensuring that no one else has to face what I did. No one else should feel powerless because of the color of their skin." The camera flashed with a barrage of photos, but Maya stood strong, her voice steady. "I will not rest until there are concrete steps taken to ensure that racial discrimination has no place in this world. It's time we finally start holding corporations accountable for the behavior of their staff. And it's time for each of us to look at how we treat others, because change begins with all of us." As Maya finished speaking, she could feel a wave of relief and determination wash over her. She had said what needed to be said, and now the world was watching. The response was immediate. Hashtags started trending across social media. Hashtag justice for Maya, hashtag endracism, and hashtag equality in the skies. The backlash against the airline was swift. News outlets across the world covered the story, with many questioning how such an incident could have occurred in the first place. Activists rallied, calling for a boycott of the airline until they took action. The pressure on the airline's board was immense. Maya knew the battle was far from free. The following weeks felt like a blur to Maya. Every time she opened her phone, she was bombarded with notifications, news updates, social media messages, emails from advocacy groups, and even personal messages of support from unexpected places. The world was watching, and for the first time in her life, she realized just how powerful her voice could be. The airline's response had been swift and direct. They issued a public apology, but Maya wasn't satisfied. It wasn't enough to simply say sorry. She wanted change, real change. In the days that followed, Maya worked tirelessly with her team of lawyers, activists, and public relations experts to ensure that the airline was held accountable in more ways than one. A settlement was offered, but Maya turned it down. She didn't want money. She wanted a commitment to better training for staff, a review of company policies, and a public campaign aimed at eliminating discrimination across all aspects of the airline industry. The CEO of the airline, a man named Richard Montgomery, had requested an urgent meeting with her. Maya, despite her busy schedule, agreed to meet with him. She knew the power of sitting across from someone and watching their reactions. Sometimes, that was when the truth came out. The meeting took place in a luxury hotel conference room with glass windows overlooking the city. Richard was already there, his face tense, his posture stiff. It was clear he was feeling the heat of the situation. "Maya, thank you for meeting with me," Richard began, his voice trying to sound calm, but there was an underlying tone of frustration. Maya sat across from him, her gaze unwavering. "I didn't come here for small talk, Richard. I came here for action." The CEO shifted in his seat, clearly not prepared for her directness. "I understand. We've heard the public outcry, and we've already started to make changes. We are rolling out sensitivity training and diversity initiatives within the company." Maya wasn't impressed. That's not enough. Training and initiatives are important, but they need to go beyond just talk. What steps are you taking to ensure this kind of incident never happens again? And what is your company doing to make real, lasting change in how your staff views and interacts with people of color? She asked, her voice strong but controlled. Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're working on implementing new policies and more thorough vetting of our staff. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again, Maya. But I want to assure you that we're doing everything we can." Maya leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "I don't want to hear about what you can do. I want to see what you've already started. I want transparency. I want measurable results. And I want this to be a movement, not just a PR stunt. You don't just have a company to protect. You have a responsibility to the public, to your employees, and to the world." Richard's expression softened for a moment as he seemed to realize the gravity of what Maya was saying. "I hear you, Maya. And I understand. We're committed to real change. We'll start by donating funds to organizations that fight racial discrimination, and we'll also set up a foundation to support Black entrepreneurs in the aviation industry. I'm willing to partner with you on this if you'll help guide us."